Welcome back to Teen Romance Library, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. Today's story? An invisible Omega servant is beaten as a political message, only to wake up to an Alpha King calmly asking, "Who hurt you?" and then personally turning sunrise into a funeral schedule. It's a fierce werewolf romance full of justice, devotion, and the helpful life lesson that if an alpha whispers instead of roars, someone has already run out of time. So if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, emotional payoffs, and stories that actually finish, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now by subscribing. Leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance, and settle in, because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it. I woke up on stone, cold, hard, unforgiving stone that pressed into my cheek like the world itself wanted to remind me I was still alive, though part of me wasn't sure that was a blessing. My body ached in ways I didn't have words for, deep, bone-rattling aches that came from more than just bruises. The kind that settled into your marrow and whispered that you'd been broken, and maybe you wouldn't ever be whole again. But it was the warmth that confused me first, because stone shouldn't be warm. Stone shouldn't smell like cedar and smoke and something wild, something that made every instinct I had left sit up and pay attention even though I could barely open my eyes. My fingers twitched against rough fabric, and I realized I wasn't on the ground. I was on a bed, a massive bed, and the scent coating everything, soaking into my skin, wrapping around my lungs with every shallow breath. It wasn't mine. It was his. Alpha. The word blazed through my mind before I could stop it. Primal and absolute. Not just any alpha. Something older. Something stronger. The kind of scent that didn't just fill a room, it claimed it. Owned it. Made every other presence seem small and insignificant by comparison. I forced my eyes open, and the world came into focus in pieces. Gray stone walls. A fireplace crackling low across the room, casting orange light that danced across dark wood furniture. Furs. Heavy, luxurious furs that I was currently tangled in, and I had the sudden, hysterical thought that waking up in an Alpha King's bed was definitely not on my survival checklist. Right below "Don't get caught," and just above "Don't die horribly." Check, check, and, well, the jury was still out on that last one. I tried to sit up, and that's when I saw it, the blood. Dried and dark against my forearm, smeared across my collarbone. Not fresh, but enough to make my stomach twist. Enough to bring it all rushing back in fragments I didn't want to remember. Hands grabbing, voices laughing. Pain that went on until I couldn't tell where my body ended and the hurt began. My breath hitched, too loud in the quiet, and that's when I heard him move. He'd been there the whole time, standing in the shadows near the window, so still I'd missed him completely. But now he stepped forward, and the firelight caught him full-on tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes that glowed faint amber in the dim light. Not human eyes. Not entirely. Wolf eyes. And they were locked on me with an intensity that made my pulse spike, made something in my chest pull tight even though I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare back. He crossed the room in 3 strides, silent despite his size, and then he was right there, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him, close enough that his scent crashed over me like a wave and made my head spin. His gaze traveled over me slowly, too slowly, taking in every cut, every bruise, every mark I knew was painted across my skin. And then he spoke, and his voice was low, rough, barely controlled. "Who hurt you?" It wasn't a question. Not really. It was something else entirely. Something that sounded like a promise and a threat wrapped together so tightly you couldn't separate them. Like he was asking not because he didn't know, but because he needed to hear me say it. Needed me to give him permission for whatever he was about to do. And the rage, God. The rage simmering beneath those 3 quiet words, it should have terrified me. Should have sent me scrambling backward. Should have triggered every instinct that screamed alpha, danger, run. But it didn't. Because beneath the rage, threaded through it like gold through stone, was something else. Something that felt almost like safety. His hand hovered near my face, fingers curled like he wanted to touch but didn't dare, and I realized he was shaking, just barely, just enough that I could see the tremor in his knuckles, the coiled tension in his shoulders like he was holding himself back from something violent and inevitable. Who? Hurt. You. Each word fell heavier than the last, and I felt them settle in my chest, in the hollow spaces where fear lived. And I didn't know him. Didn't know his name, or why I was here, or what he wanted from me. But when I opened my mouth to answer, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever had done this to me, they were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. I should probably tell you how I ended up there bleeding and broken in a stranger's bed, staring into the eyes of an alpha king who looked ready to burn the world down for answers I wasn't sure I could give. But to understand that, you'd have to understand what it means to be invisible. Really, truly invisible. Not the kind where people don't notice you at a party, or forget your name after you've met twice. I mean the kind of invisible where your existence is so carefully erased, so meticulously diminished, that you become part of the background like wallpaper or stone floors or the air itself. Necessary, maybe, but never seen, never acknowledged, never real. That was my life. That was what it meant to be an Omega in the Crescent Moon Pack. We had rules, survival rules, the kind you learned early or you didn't survive long enough to matter. Rule number 1, don't be noticed. Keep your head down, your eyes lowered, your voice soft if you had to speak at all, which you shouldn't, not unless directly addressed. Move through spaces like a ghost. Anticipate needs before they're spoken. Disappear the moment your task is done. Rule number 2, don't smell. Omegas carry scent like a signature, sweet and warm and designed by nature, to call to alphas in ways we had no control over. So we scrubbed ourselves raw with scentless soap, wore suppressants that made our skin itch and our stomachs cramp, and prayed to the moon goddess that nobody got close enough to catch even a whisper of what we were. Because if they did, if an alpha caught your scent and decided they wanted you, there were no laws protecting you. No rules. You were just there, and they could take whatever they wanted. And rule number 3, the one that mattered most, don't hope. Don't hope for better. Don't hope for kindness. Don't hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might see you as something more than a servant, a body, a thing to be used and discarded. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. Hope got you hurt. So I didn't hope. I survived. I woke before dawn every day and worked until long after dark. I scrubbed floors until my knees bled through my skirts. I carried trays of food to wolves who never looked at me, who spoke over me and around me like I wasn't there. I washed their clothes and made their beds, and stood in corners during pack meetings, silent and still, while they debated politics and territory and bloodlines like we Omegas weren't even the same species. And maybe we weren't. Not to them. The pack hierarchy was simple, brutal, efficient. Alphas ruled, betas followed. Omegas served. There was no mobility, no climbing, no earning your way into something better. You were born into your rank and you died there. And the only real question was how much suffering you'd endure in between. The cruelty wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was the beatings, the casual violence, the way an alpha might grab you too hard just to remind you they could. But mostly it was quieter than that. It was in the way they never used our names, just called us Omega, like it was interchangeable with any of the others. It was in the scraps of food we ate standing up in the kitchen because we weren't allowed at the table. It was in the cold, dark corner of the pack house basement where we slept on thin mats, crowded together for warmth because heat cost resources and resources weren't wasted on us. It was in the way they looked through you, not at you, and you started to wonder if maybe you really were invisible. If maybe you'd been erased so thoroughly that even you couldn't remember what it felt like to matter. I learned to wrap my invisibility around myself like armor. I made myself smaller, quieter, less. I perfected the art of not being there even when I was standing right in front of them. And it worked. Most days, it worked. Until it didn't. Until Marcus the Beta's son, cruel-eyed and sneering, decided he was bored. Until he started noticing the new Omega girl who kept her head down and never fought back. Until he realized that invisibility only works if the person looking wants to let you disappear. And Marcus didn't want that. He wanted to see me flinch. Wanted to hear me beg. Wanted to prove that even invisible things could be broken if you tried hard enough. It started small. A shove in the hallway. His hand lingering too long when I served him dinner. Comments whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Vile things that made my skin crawl and my stomach turn. I endured it the way I'd been taught, silently, invisibly, hoping he'd get bored and move on to easier prey. But he didn't get bored. He got worse. And 3 days ago, when I was sent to clean the training grounds after dark, he was waiting for me. He wasn't alone. 2 of his friends flanked him, grinning like they'd won something, and I knew that invisibility wasn't going to save me this time. I tried to run. Of course I tried. But you can't outrun wolves, especially not when you're just human slow Omega, and they caught me before I made it 10 feet. They dragged me into the woods, and what happened next? I couldn't think about it. Wouldn't think about it. Because if I did, if I let myself remember the way they laughed while I screamed, the way they held me down and took turns and didn't stop even when I begged, when I sobbed, when I went silent because I'd run out of voice. If I thought about that, I'd shatter. And I couldn't afford to shatter. Not yet. So I locked it away in some deep, dark place inside myself and focused on the only thing that mattered. Surviving, breathing, existing for 1 more minute, and then another after that. I thought I'd die in those woods. Part of me wanted to. But then he found me. The Alpha King. I didn't know who he was at first, just that someone lifted me from the ground like I weighed nothing, wrapped me in warmth and that overwhelming cedar smoke scent, and carried me away while I drifted in and out of consciousness. I heard his voice, low and furious, giving orders I couldn't follow. Felt the softness of furs beneath me, the crackle of fire, the gentle press of a cloth against my wounds. And then I woke up, to stone and blood and amber eyes, to 3 quiet words that sounded like a death sentence. Who hurt you? And I realized, maybe for the first time in my entire invisible life, that someone was finally looking at me, really, truly seeing me. And I didn't know whether that terrified me more than anything else, or if it was the first real hope I'd felt in years. I couldn't answer him. The words were right there, caught somewhere between my throat and my teeth, but I couldn't force them out, because saying it out loud, naming them, claiming what they'd done would make it real in a way my mind wasn't ready to handle. So I just stared at him, at this enormous alpha whose hands were still shaking with barely leashed violence, and tried to remember how to breathe. He waited, patient in a way that felt wrong for someone radiating that much controlled fury. His jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth, and I could see his wolf just beneath the surface, eyes flickering between human brown and amber gold, the air around him practically vibrating with the effort it took to stay still. "You're safe here," he said finally, and his voice had gentled just a fraction. Still rough, still carrying that undercurrent of rage, but softer. "Whatever happened, whoever did this, they can't touch you now. I give you my word." My word. Like that meant something. Like words from an alpha had ever protected me before. But there was something in his eyes, something raw and honest and solid, that made me want to believe him, made me want to take that offering and wrap it around myself like a shield. So I opened my mouth, and I told him. Not everything, not the details that would shred me apart if I spoke them, but enough that he'd understand. "The Beta's son," I whispered, and my voice came out broken, rusted from screaming. "Marcus, and his friends, they were waiting for me." Something changed in his face. Not his expression, exactly, that stayed eerily calm, controlled, but something behind it. Something ancient and predatory that made the wolf in me, dormant and small as she was, whimper and try to hide. "Go on," he said quietly. So I did. I told him about the corridor, about being sent to clean the training grounds after the evening meal, when the pack was settling in for the night and the grounds would be empty. It was a normal task, one I'd done dozens of times. But that night felt different from the moment I stepped outside. The air was too still, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I should have run then. Should have listened to the instinct screaming at me to turn around, go back inside, find someone else to do it. But Omegas don't get to refuse tasks. We don't get to say no. So I kept walking, my cleaning supplies clutched in shaking hands, and tried to ignore the prickling at the back of my neck that said I wasn't alone. They came out of the shadows like they'd been waiting there for hours. Marcus in front, grinning that cruel, lazy grin that never reached his eyes. Jackson and Cole flanking him, bigger and meaner. Cracking their knuckles like this was just another training exercise. Just another way to pass the time. Well, Marcus drawled, and the sound of his voice made my skin crawl. "Look what we have here. Little Omega, all alone in the dark. That's not very safe, is it?" I dropped my supplies and backed away, already knowing it was pointless but unable to stop myself. I have work to do. The Beta told me." "The Beta told you to clean," Marcus interrupted, still smiling. "And you will. After. The The word hung in the air like a noose, and I knew what he meant. What they all meant. I could see it in their eyes, smell it in the shift of their scent, from casual interest to active hunting. I ran. Not because I thought I'd escape, but because staying still felt like giving up, and some stubborn, stupid part of me refused to just hand myself over. I made it maybe 20 feet before Jackson caught me, his hand fisting in my hair and yanking me backward so hard I felt something tear. I screamed, and Cole laughed, actually laughed like it was funny, like I was entertainment. They dragged me into the tree line, away from the pack house, away from anyone who might hear or care or intervene. Not that anyone would. Omega's screaming wasn't unusual. Omega's being hurt wasn't noteworthy. We were disposable. Marcus made that clear when he shoved me to the ground and crouched down, his face inches from mine. "You know what your problem is?" he said conversationally, like we were discussing the weather. "You think being invisible makes you safe. You think if you're small and quiet and obedient, we'll leave you alone." He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him, and his grip was bruising. "But you're wrong. Because sometimes, little Omega, we need to hurt something. And you?" He leaned closer, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath, the excitement in his scent. "You're perfect." What happened next wasn't about desire, wasn't about wanting me or finding me attractive or any of the things Omegas were usually brutalized for. It was about power, about reminding all of us exactly where we stood in the hierarchy, about sending a message written in bruises and blood and broken bones. Marcus told me as much while they held me down. "My father's losing influence," he hissed in my ear while I sobbed and struggled and begged. "The Alpha's questioning his decisions, thinks he's going soft. So we need to remind everyone what happens when you show weakness, when you let Omegas think they matter." He grabbed my throat, squeezed until black spots danced in my vision. "You're the reminder, sweetheart. You're the lesson." And then they taught it, over and over, taking turns while I screamed myself hoarse, while I begged the moon goddess for mercy or death or anything that would make it stop. They didn't stop until I went silent, until I stopped fighting, until I was just a broken thing bleeding into the dirt, and even their cruelty got bored. Marcus stood over me when they were done, adjusting his clothes like he'd just finished a workout. "Clean yourself up," he said dismissively. "And don't bother telling anyone. Who'd believe in Omega anyway?" They left me there. Walked away laughing about where they'd get drinks next, like they hadn't just destroyed someone, like I was already forgotten. I don't know how long I lay there. Long enough that the blood dried tacky on my skin. Long enough that the cold settled into my bones and made me stop shaking. Long enough that I started to think maybe I should just close my eyes and let the darkness take me. But then I heard footsteps. Different ones. Heavier, purposeful, and a voice deep, commanding, furious that cut through the fog in my mind like a blade. "Moon goddess. What have they done?" Strong arms lifted me, impossibly gentle despite their size, and that cedar smoke scent wrapped around me like a blanket. I tried to speak, to warn him that I was dirty, that I'd get blood on him, that he shouldn't touch me because I was ruined now, broken beyond repair. But he just held me tighter and started walking, and I heard him speaking not to me but to someone else, his voice carrying that unmistakable alpha command. "Get the healer, now, and find out who did this." A pause. "Find out who allowed this." His arms tightened around me, careful of my injuries, and he looked down at me with eyes that burned gold in the darkness. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're safe now, I promise." And despite everything, despite the rules that said alphas couldn't be trusted, despite the pain radiating through every inch of my body, despite the voice in my head screaming that this was just another trap, I believed him. I woke in his bed 3 times before I could stay conscious long enough to understand where I was. The first time, I panicked, thrashing against sheets that felt too soft, too clean, my body screaming in protest until gentle hands pressed me back down, and a woman's voice murmured soothing things I couldn't quite hear. The healer, I'd realize later, a kind-faced beta named Caroline, who cleaned my wounds with steady hands and didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. The second time, I was alone. Just me and the fire and that overwhelming scent that seemed to seep from the very stones. I tried to sit up, made it about 3 inches before pain lanced through my ribs and stole my breath. I must have made some sound, a whimper, a gasp, something pathetic because suddenly he was there, materializing from the shadows like he'd been waiting. "Don't move," he'd said, and it wasn't a command so much as a plea. "You're badly hurt, Just rest. Please. Please. An Alpha King saying please to an Omega. I'd passed out again before I could process that. But the third time I woke up asking who hurt me, and I'd finally told him that's when everything changed. He stood there for a long moment after I finished speaking, so perfectly still he could have been carved from stone. The only movement was the slight rise and fall of his chest, each breath measured and controlled like he was physically restraining something inside himself that wanted desperately to break free. Then he turned and walked to the door, and I watched the muscles in his back shift beneath his shirt, saw the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He opened the door without looking back at me. "Caroline," he called, his voice carrying that alpha resonance that made it impossible to ignore. "Stay with her. Don't leave her alone." The healer appeared almost instantly, like she'd been waiting just outside. She slipped past him with a nervous glance at his face, and yeah, I understood that nervousness. Even from across the room I could feel the rage pouring off him in waves. "My lord," she started. "Stay with her," he repeated, softer but no less absolute. Then he looked at someone else in the hallway, someone I couldn't see. "Marcus Thorne, Jackson Reeves, and Cole Winters. Bring them to the main square. Now." "All three, my lord?" Did I stutter? A pause. Then, "And if they resist?" "And." The smile that crossed his face wasn't really a smile. It was something colder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. "Then drag them. I don't particularly care what condition they're in when they arrive." He finally looked back at me, and the rage banked just enough that I could see the person underneath it. "I'll be back soon," he said, and it sounded like a promise. "No one will hurt you here. You have my word." Then he was gone, the door closing with a soft click that somehow felt more final than if he'd slammed it. Caroline moved to my side, checking my bandages with practiced efficiency. "You're fortunate he found you," she said quietly. "The Alpha King isn't known for his mercy." I stared at the closed door, at the space where he'd been standing, and felt something strange twist in my chest. "Who is he?" I whispered. She paused, her hands stilling on the bandage she was adjusting. "You really don't know?" I shook my head, and even that small movement made my vision swim. "That's Daniel Blackwood," she said, and her voice carried a weight that suggested the name should mean something. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories. He united 7 packs under his rule 15 years ago, and he's kept peace in lands that hadn't known anything but war for generations." She resumed her work, her touch gentle despite the gravity of her words. "He's fair but absolute, merciful to those who deserve it, ruthless to those who don't." She met my eyes, and something in her expression made me shiver despite the warmth of the fire. "And you just told him that 3 wolves brutalized an Omega under his protection, in his territory." The way she said it like I'd just lit a fuse and all we could do now was wait for the explosion. I should have been terrified, should have been panicking about what would happen next, about retribution and politics and the fact that Marcus's father was an important beta who probably wouldn't take kindly to his son being dragged before the Alpha King by an Omega's word. But instead, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Bone-deep, overwhelming relief that anyone was finally going to do something. That maybe, just this once, being Omega wouldn't mean being helpless. And yeah, there was a twisted kind of humor in realizing that I felt safer in the bedroom of a furious Alpha King who could probably kill me with one hand than I'd ever felt in my own pack. That his rage, controlled and leashed and directed, felt less threatening than Marcus's casual cruelty ever had. At least Daniel's fury wasn't aimed at me. Caroline left after making sure I was comfortable, promising to return with food and fresh bandages. The moment the door closed, the silence settled over me like a weight. I stared at the ceiling, at the way the firelight made shadows dance across the stone, and tried not to think about what was happening in the square. Tried not to imagine Marcus's face when he realized who'd found me, who'd brought me here, who was currently deciding his fate. I failed spectacularly. The thoughts came anyway, vivid and sharp. Marcus being dragged from whatever comfortable corner of the pack house he'd retreated to, confusion turning to fear when he saw where they were taking him. The crowd that would gather because pack justice was always public, always witnessed. The moment he'd see Daniel standing there, and he'd know that his father's position wouldn't save him from this. Part of me felt guilty for the satisfaction that thought brought, for the dark, vindictive part of my soul that wanted him to be afraid, that wanted him to feel even a fraction of the terror he'd inflicted on me. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of surviving instead of living. tired of rules that protected everyone except the ones who needed protection most. I closed my eyes and listened to the fire crackle, to the wind howling somewhere outside the thick stone walls, and I waited. For Daniel to return. For whatever came next. For the moment when I'd have to decide whether an Alpha King's protection was a gift or just another kind of cage. But deep in my bones, in that primal place where instinct lived, I already knew the answer. Because when he'd asked me who hurt me, when he'd looked at me with those burning amber eyes and promised safety, I'd felt something shift, something fundamental and irreversible. Like the world had tilted on its axis and nothing would ever be the same again. And honestly, after years of invisible, silent suffering, I was ready for different. Even if different meant standing in the eye of an Alpha King's storm and hoping I didn't get burned by the aftermath. Even if it meant everything I'd known was about to shatter. I was so damn ready. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, dawn light was filtering through the window and Caroline was back, her face pale and drawn. "You should eat something," she said, setting a tray on the table beside the bed. But her hands were shaking, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "What happened?" I asked, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. Clearer. She hesitated, warring with herself, then finally looked at me. "It's done," she said simply. "The Alpha King has passed judgment." Something cold slithered down my spine. What kind of judgment? The kind that sends a message. She moved to the window, staring out at something I couldn't see from the bed. He called the entire pack to the square. Everyone, even dragged Beta Thorn from his bed to watch. I tried to sit up, ignoring the protest from my ribs. "Caroline, he made them confess," she continued, her voice distant, "in front of everyone. Made them describe what they'd done to you, every detail, while the pack listened. Marcus tried to lie at first. Said you'd wanted it, that you'd been asking for it." My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. The Alpha King didn't even blink. Just said, "Then explain the bruises shaped like your fingers around her throat. Explain the claw marks from being held down. Explain why she was found bleeding and unconscious in the woods if she wanted it so badly." Caroline turned back to me, and there were tears on her cheeks. Marcus couldn't. None of them could. So the truth came out, all of it. How they'd planned it, how they'd hunted you, how they'd... She swallowed hard. The whole pack heard it. Every vile, brutal word. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what she was telling me. Because pack justice didn't work like this. Omegas didn't get vindication. We got blamed. We got erased. Beta Thorn tried to intervene, Caroline said. Offered compensation, territory. Said his son had made a mistake, but execution was too extreme for a... She stopped, her jaw tight. "For a what?" I whispered, though I already knew. "For just an Omega." Her voice cracked on the words. "That's what he said. Just an Omega." The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. "What did the Alpha King say?" Caroline's expression shifted into something between awe and terror. He said, "There is no just when it comes to my people. There is no hierarchy that excuses brutality. There is no rank that permits rape." She drew a shaky breath. Then he stripped Beta Thorn of his title, banished him from the territory, and sentenced all three of them, Marcus, Jackson, and Cole, to death. The word hung in the air like smoke. "Death. They're already gone," Caroline added softly. "The Alpha King executed them himself, personally, at dawn. Made sure everyone watched so they'd understand this is what happens when you hurt someone under his protection." I should have felt something. Triumph, maybe. Satisfaction. Justice. But instead, I just felt numb. Hollow. Like I'd been scraped clean from the inside. And nothing remained but empty space. "The pack is terrified," Caroline continued. "No one's ever seen him like that. Cold. Absolute. He didn't rage or lose control. He was just inevitable. Like watching a mountain fall or a storm roll in. You couldn't stop it. You could only witness it." She came back to my side, her hand gentle on my arm. "You're marked now. Everyone knows you're under the Alpha King's protection. No one will touch you. No one will even look at you wrong. Untouchable. The word I'd always wanted to be, but for entirely different reasons." I closed my eyes and tried to reconcile this reality with everything I'd known. Tried to understand a world where an Omega's pain mattered, where justice wasn't just a word but an action, swift and absolute. "He's asking for you," Caroline said quietly. "The Alpha King. He wants to know if you're well enough to see him." My eyes snapped open. "Now? He's been outside your door since he returned. Won't leave. Won't rest, just waiting. Something in my chest tightened painfully. Why? Caroline smiled, sad and knowing. I think you should ask him that yourself. He looked different in the morning light. Harder, more dangerous. Like the night had stripped away whatever softness he'd shown me, and left only the Alpha King, the one who'd just executed 3 wolves without hesitation, and banished a beta who'd served his pack for decades. But when he stepped into the room and his eyes found mine, something in his expression gentled. Just a fraction, just enough. How are you feeling? He asked, closing the door behind him. Like I should be asking you that, I said before I could stop myself. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. I'm not the one who was hurt. No. But you're the one who just... I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Just executed 3 wolves for me. Just upended pack hierarchy for me. Just made yourself a target for anyone who thinks Omega lives don't matter. He crossed the room slowly, giving me time to object, to tell him to stop. I didn't. I won't apologize for what I did, he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. They deserved worse than they got. I wasn't going to ask you to apologize. I studied his face, looking for something. Regret, doubt, anything that suggested this would blow back on me eventually. But all I saw was certainty. I was going to ask why. Why? He looked genuinely confused. Why you care? Why any of this matters to you? I stopped, hating the words even as I spoke them. I'm just an Omega. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Don't, he said, and his voice carried enough command that my wolf stirred, responding instinctively. Don't diminish yourself like that. Don't use their language, their hierarchy, their poison. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the intensity in his eyes made it impossible to look away. You're not just anything. You're a person who was brutalized by cowards. You're someone who survived something that would have broken most wolves. He stopped abruptly, jaw working like he was biting back words he wasn't ready to say. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken things, and that's when I smelled it. The shift in his scent. It had been cedar and smoke when he found me, overwhelming and distinctly alpha, but now there was something else underneath it, something warmer, sweeter, like honey and summer storms and, oh no. My heart started pounding, and I knew he could hear it. Knew he could probably smell the answering shift in my own scent, the way my Omega responded to whatever was happening between us, even though my mind was screaming that this was impossible, dangerous, wrong. Juliet, he said, and it was the first time he'd used my name. The first time he'd made me real instead of just another injured wolf under his protection. I need you to understand something. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe, just nodded. When I found you in those woods, when I saw what they'd done something in me. He stopped, dragging a hand through his hair in frustration. I've been Alpha King for 15 years. I've seen battle. I've seen cruelty. I've made hard decisions and carried their weight without flinching. But seeing you there, broken and bleeding and... His hands clenched into fists. I wanted to tear the world apart, he finished quietly, and I couldn't understand why. Why you, specifically, made me feel like my control was hanging by a thread. Why every instinct I had was screaming at me to protect you, to keep you safe, to make sure nothing ever hurt you again. He met my eyes, and the gold in his was burning brighter now. And then you woke up, and I scented you, really scented you, beneath the suppressants and the fear, and I realized he didn't finish, didn't need to, because I understood. Finally understood what that shift in his scent meant, what the pull between us meant. What the moon goddess had apparently decided in her infinite, terrifying wisdom. Mate. He was my mate, and I was his. The word hung between us like a living thing. Mate. I should have been elated. Should have fallen into his arms with gratitude and relief, because what Omega wouldn't want to be mated to the most powerful alpha in the territories? What Omega wouldn't see this as salvation, as winning some cosmic lottery they never knew they'd entered? But all I felt was terror. Cold, visceral, all-consuming terror that started in my gut and spread through my limbs until I was shaking, and not from my injuries this time. No, I whispered. He went very still. No, I can't. My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded, how broken. I can't do this. I can't be claimed, he finished softly, and there was no anger in his tone, no alpha dominance or wounded pride, just understanding that somehow made it worse. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes, staring instead at my hands twisted in the sheets. Every time an alpha claims an omega, it's the same story. We become property, possessions. We lose what little autonomy we had and become extensions of our mate's will. My throat tightened. And I know you're not like them. I know you just executed 3 wolves for hurting me. But what happens when the bond settles? When the claiming mark fades from fresh to permanent? What happens when I'm not a novelty anymore? When I'm just another omega who— Stop. The word wasn't a command. It was a plea. I looked up, and his expression nearly undid me. Raw, open, hurting in a way I didn't expect from someone so powerful. I would never claim you against your will, he said, and each word sounded like it cost him. The bond, what we are to each other, it doesn't give me ownership over you. It doesn't make you mine to control. But the stories are about alphas who abuse the bond, who use it as an excuse for dominance instead of what it's meant to be. He leaned back in his chair, giving me space even though I could see how much the distance cost him. A true mate bond is supposed to be partnership, balance, 2 people who make each other stronger, not one person who diminishes the other. He dragged a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. I won't lie to you, Juliet. The bond is already there. I feel it, this pull toward you that makes it physically painful to walk away. And you probably feel it too, even if you're fighting it. His eyes found mine again. But feeling it doesn't mean acting on it. Doesn't mean I have any right to demand anything from you. You're an alpha king, I said, and I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. You could demand anything. I could, he agreed. But I won't. Not from you. Not ever. I wanted to believe him. Desperately wanted to trust that he meant what he said. But trust required vulnerability, and I had none left. It had been beaten out of me in those woods, stripped away with every other illusion I'd held about safety and justice and the way the world worked. What if I rejected? I asked quietly. The bond. What if I say no and walk away? Something flickered across his face pane, sharp and bright, but he didn't flinch. Then you walk away. I won't stop you. I won't force the bond or manipulate you into accepting it. You'd be free to go wherever you want, with my protection and resources to help you start over. Just like that? Just like that. The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. Because this care without demand, this offering of choice when he could simply take, was more dangerous than any claiming mark. It made me want to lean into it, want to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be different. And that wanting terrified me more than anything else. Because wanting meant hoping. And hope was the thing I'd specifically forbidden myself. Hope got you hurt. Hope made you careless. Hope set you up for devastation, when reality inevitably crashed back in. I pulled my knees up carefully, ignoring the way my ribs protested, and wrapped my arms around them like I could hold myself together through sheer force of will. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. I don't know how to be someone's mate. I barely know how to be a person instead of just a thing that serves and survives. Then we'll figure it out together, he said simply. No expectations, no timeline, just time. Space to heal. Space to decide what you want instead of what's expected of you. He stood slowly, and I felt the loss of his presence like a physical thing even though he hadn't touched me. I'm going to leave now, he said. Give you room to breathe without me crowding you. Caroline will stay close, and there are guards outside if you need anything. You're safe here, Juliet. Whether you accept the bond or not, that doesn't change. He moved toward the door, and I should have let him go. Should have been grateful for the distance and the choice he was offering. But instead, I heard myself say, Daniel? He turned, and the hope that flared in his eyes at the sound of his name nearly broke me. Thank you, I whispered, for finding me, for everything. You don't need to thank me for basic decency. His hand was on the door handle, but he paused, though I'd be lying if I said I did it purely for moral reasons. No? He smiled, sad and wry. No, because even before I knew what you were to me, every instinct I had was screaming to protect you, to keep you safe, to make sure you never hurt like that again. He met my eyes across the room, so maybe I'm not quite as noble as I'm pretending to be. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, and I was alone with my thoughts and the lingering scent of cedar and smoke and possibility. I laid back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions knotted in my chest. Fear. That was easy to identify. Fear that this was too good to be true. Fear that I'd accept the bond and he'd change. become like every other alpha who saw omegas as possessions. Fear that I'd reject it and spend the rest of my life wondering what I'd thrown away. But underneath the fear was something else. Something tentative and fragile and almost unbearably painful. Want. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that his promises were real. Wanted to imagine a future where I wasn't invisible or disposable or constantly braced for the next hurt. And more than that, more than all the logical, self-protective reasons I could list, I wanted him. The way he'd looked at me like I mattered. The way he'd sought justice for violence no one else cared about. The way he'd given me choice when he could have simply taken. The bond hummed in my chest, warm and persistent, like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I pressed my hand over my heart and felt it pulse there, this connection I hadn't asked for, didn't know if I wanted, couldn't quite bring myself to refuse. A laugh bubbled up, slightly hysterical. Because of course this would happen to me. Of course I'd survive the worst night of my life only to discover I was mated to an alpha king. Of course the moon goddess would look at my carefully constructed rules for survival and decide to shatter every single one. And the most absurd part? I was lying here actually considering it, actually wondering if maybe refusing an alpha king was even legal, or if there was some ancient law that said you couldn't just dismiss your fated mate because you had trust issues and a healthy fear of being claimed. Though honestly, after everything I'd been through, trust issues seemed pretty reasonable. The exhaustion hit me suddenly, dragging me down despite the thoughts spiraling through my mind. My body was still healing, still recovering, and emotions were apparently exhausting work. As I drifted off, I had one clear thought. I had time. Daniel had promised me that. Time to heal, time to decide, time to figure out if the terrifying thing in my chest was the bond pulling me toward him, or if it was something far more dangerous, like actually falling for the alpha who'd given me back my voice, and refused to take anything in return. I'd been in Daniel's wing of the palace for 3 days when the whispers started. I heard them through the walls, carried by servants who'd forgotten I had ears, through Caroline's careful silences when she changed my bandages, through the tension that radiated from the guards stationed outside my door, their postures just a little too rigid, their eyes just a little too watchful. Something was happening, something that involved me. By the 4th day, I was healed enough to walk slowly, painfully, but mobile. Caroline had brought me real clothes instead of the nightgown I'd been wearing, and I'd actually felt almost human getting dressed. Almost like a person instead of a broken thing being carefully maintained. Daniel visited twice a day, morning and evening, always asking permission before entering, always keeping his distance unless I invited him closer. We talked about small things mostly. Books, weather, the gardens I could see from my window, anything except the bond thrumming between us or the executions that had shaken the pack or the future neither of us knew how to name. It was careful, gentle, safe. I should have known it couldn't last. On the 5th morning, Daniel didn't come. Caroline arrived instead, her face drawn and worried in a way that made my stomach clench. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. She set down the breakfast tray with hands that weren't quite steady. "The council has been called. An emergency session." "What does that have to do with Daniel missing breakfast?" "Everything." She sat on the edge of my bed, clearly wrestling with how much to tell me. "Alpha Marcus, not your Marcus, a different one. The Alpha of the Eastern Territories, he's challenging the king's recent decisions. Publicly." Cold dread settled in my gut. What decisions? But I already knew. "The executions," Caroline confirmed quietly. "The banishment of Beta Thorn. He's calling it an overreach, an abuse of power. He's saying—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "Say it." "He's saying the Alpha King has been compromised, that his judgment is clouded by—" She met my eyes. "By attachment to an Omega." There it was, the thing I'd been dreading since the moment I'd understood what Daniel and I were to each other. I was a liability, a weakness, something his enemies could use against him. "What happens now?" I asked, proud that my voice didn't shake. "The council will convene this afternoon. They'll hear Marcus's grievances and the Alpha King will have to respond, defend his choices." She reached for my hand, squeezed gently. "Daniel doesn't want you anywhere near this. He's ordered that you stay here, protected, away from—" "No," Caroline blinked. "Juliet." "No," I repeated, stronger this time. "I'm not hiding. I'm not letting him face this alone because of me. You're still healing. You're not strong enough. I'm strong enough to stand." I pushed to my feet, ignoring the protest from my ribs. "I'm strong enough to speak, and I'm sure as hell strong enough to refuse to be the invisible Omega they all want me to be. Something shifted in Caroline's expression, surprise, giving way to respect. He'll be furious. Then he'll be furious. I lifted my chin, channeling every scrap of courage I could find. But I won't let him sacrifice his authority to protect me from consequences I'm willing to face. The council chamber. It's not kind to Omegas. They'll tear you apart if they sense weakness. Good thing I'm done being weak then. The council chamber was exactly as imposing as I'd imagined. Vaulted ceilings, stone columns carved with pack histories and territorial markers, a massive round table where 7 alphas sat, each representing their region, each radiating power that would have sent most Omegas running. I walked in anyway. The room went silent. Every eye turned to me shocked, calculating, hostile. I felt their judgment like physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, trying to make me small again, trying to remind me of my place. I kept walking. Daniel was at the head of the table, and the look on his face when he saw me was pure fury. Not at me, I realized, but at the situation. At whatever barrier I'd just crossed that he'd tried to keep me behind. What is the meaning of this? Alpha Marcus demanded. He was older than Daniel, gray threading through dark hair, with cold eyes that assessed me like I was livestock. This is a closed council session. Omegas are not permitted. She's with me, Daniel said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. And she stays. Marcus's lip curled. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're allowing personal attachments to cloud your judgment, to compromise your authority. My judgment is perfectly clear. Is it? Marcus leaned forward, addressing the other alphas more than Daniel. 3 weeks ago, our king executed 3 wolves and banished a high-ranking beta, not for treason, not for betrayal of the pack, but because they hurt an Omega. He said the last word, like it was poison. And now she's here, in his palace, under his protection. Tell me, brothers, does this seem like the actions of an objective leader? It seems like the actions of someone who upholds justice, Daniel replied coldly. Or have we degraded so far that rape and torture are acceptable as long as the victim is Omega? Murmurs rippled through the council. Not all disapproving, I noticed. Some of the alphas looked uncomfortable with Marcus's line of questioning. But Marcus wasn't finished. Justice? He laughed, harsh and mocking. You call it justice. I call it favoritism. Tell me, my king, would you have reacted the same way if it had been a beta, an alpha? Or was it specifically this Omega who triggered such extreme measures? The implication hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Mate. He was dancing around the word, but everyone in the room knew what he was suggesting, that Daniel had acted not from principle but from bond, that his protection was bias, that his justice was compromised. And maybe if I'd been the old Juliet, the invisible one who'd learned to disappear, I would have stayed silent, would have let them debate my existence like I wasn't standing right there. But I'd spent 5 days being seen, being treated like I mattered, and I'd be damned if I let them reduce me to a political inconvenience. You're right, I said. Every head swiveled toward me. Daniel's eyes widened fractionally, though he didn't speak. You're absolutely right, I continued, my voice carrying farther than I'd expected in the massive chamber. The Alpha King's response was extreme. Unprecedented even. 3 executions and a banishment for crimes against an Omega? Unheard of. Marcus smiled, clearly thinking I was agreeing with him. Exactly my point, which is exactly the problem. His smile faltered. I took a step closer to the table, my heart hammering but my voice steady. You're calling his justice extreme because it treated an Omega like she mattered, because it held alphas accountable for their actions, because it suggested that maybe, just maybe, Omega lives have value beyond service and silence. I met Marcus's eyes, refusing to flinch from his glare. And you're right to be concerned. Because if what he did for me becomes the standard, if every Omega who's brutalized can expect justice instead of being told she should have known better, if alphas can't assault us without consequences, I smiled, sharp and cold. Then yes, Alpha Marcus, everything changes. The silence that followed was absolute. The real question, I continued, addressing the entire council now, isn't whether the Alpha King's judgment is clouded. It's whether yours has been all along, whether you've been so comfortable with Omega suffering that basic decency looks like favoritism to you. How dare you? Marcus started. I dare because I have nothing left to lose. My voice didn't shake, didn't waver. You can dismiss me, exile me, kill me if that's what it takes to make your point. But you can't make me invisible again. And you can't undo what he did, which is show every Omega in these territories that maybe, finally, someone gives a damn. I turned to Daniel, and the look in his eyes, pride mixed with concern, mixed with something fiercer, nearly undid my composure. I didn't ask for his protection, I said, softer now but no less firm. I didn't ask to be mated to an alpha king, but I won't apologize for it either. And I sure as hell won't let him be punished for doing what every leader should do, protecting the powerless instead of enabling the powerful. I stepped back, suddenly exhausted, adrenaline draining away and leaving me shaky. So vote, I finished. Challenge him. Question his authority. But don't you dare pretend that justice for Omegas is the problem. The problem is that it took this long. Then I turned and walked out, my head high, before anyone could see how badly I was trembling, before they could see that I'd just bet everything on the hope that courage could be louder than fear, and that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found something worth being visible for. I made it exactly halfway down the corridor before my legs gave out. The adrenaline that had carried me through the council chamber, that had kept my voice steady and my spine straight while I faced down 7 alphas, evaporated all at once. I stumbled, caught myself against the stone wall, and tried to remember how to breathe. What had I done? What had I just done? Spoken truth to power, apparently. Challenged the very alphas who controlled the territories. Made myself a target for anyone who wanted to maintain the status quo, where Omegas stayed silent and invisible, and that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I spun too fast, my ribs screaming in protest, and found myself facing a beta woman I didn't recognize. She was older, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and silver threading through her dark hair. I haven't decided which yet, she continued, moving closer. But either way, it was magnificent. I blinked, trying to process her words through the panic still coursing through my veins. Who are you? Mira, the Alpha King's chief advisor. She smiled, thin but genuine. And the person who's been trying to convince him for years that Omega rights needed reform. You just accomplished in 5 minutes what I couldn't manage in a decade of careful political maneuvering. I think I just made everything worse. You made everything different, she corrected, which is terrifying for people who benefit from how things are. But necessary. She glanced back toward the council chamber. You should go. The session will continue for hours, and you look like you're about to collapse. She wasn't wrong. The corridor was starting to tilt, my vision swimming at the edges. Can you make it back to your rooms? Mira asked, concern replacing her earlier approval. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good. There are guards stationed throughout the palace, extra security after. She trailed off, but I understood. After the executions. After Beta Thorn's banishment. After I'd become the most controversial Omega in the territories. I pushed off the wall and started walking, each step requiring more focus than it should have. Behind me, I heard Mira return to the council chamber, heard the massive doors close with a sound like finality. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead of me. I passed tapestries depicting pack histories, sconces flickering with firelight, windows that overlooked courtyards I'd never explored. The palace was beautiful in a way that still felt foreign, too grand, too permanent. Nothing like the servants' quarters I'd spent my life inhabiting. I was so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that I almost didn't notice the crowd. They appeared at the intersection ahead, a group of wolves, maybe 20 strong, all wearing the Crescent Moon Pack insignia, my old pack. The one that had harbored Marcus and his friends. The one where Beta Thorn had held power until 5 days ago. The one that now had every reason to hate me. My steps faltered. The smart thing would be to turn around, find another route, avoid confrontation. But my body was too exhausted for smart decisions. And besides, where would I go? The palace was full of people who either pitied me or resented me, or saw me as a political statement they hadn't asked for. So I kept walking. They saw me. I watched recognition ripple through the group, followed by something darker, anger, resentment, hatred. That's her, someone hissed. The Omega who got Marcus killed. I lowered my eyes, old habit, automatic, and tried to slip past them. Tried to be invisible again, just for a moment, just long enough to escape. But invisibility doesn't work when you've already been seen. A hand grabbed my arm, yanking me to a stop. I looked up into the face of a woman I vaguely recognized from pack gatherings. An alpha, based on her scent. Young, furious. You have some nerve showing your face, she spat. My brother is dead because of you. My breath caught. Your brother, Jackson, one of the 3 your precious Alpha King executed. Her grip tightened, claws emerging to press against my skin. He was 19 years old, barely into his prime. And you, Omega, you got him killed over nothing. Over rape, I said quietly, finding my voice. Over torture. Over existing, she snarled. That's what Omegas do. You exist to serve, to submit. And when you forget your place, Alphas remind you. That's how it's always been. The crowd had closed in around us now, forming a circle that cut me off from the rest of the corridor. I caught glimpses of guards in the distance, but they hadn't noticed yet, hadn't realized what was happening. He was teaching you a lesson, Jackson's sister continued. They all were. And instead of accepting it like you should have, you ran crying to an Alpha King who's gone soft, who thinks Omegas deserve justice. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to something cold and deadly. Well, here's our justice. I saw the blade too late. Silver Moon Goddess. It was silver gleaming in the torchlight as she pulled it from her belt. The crowd shifted, blocking the view from anyone who might help, and I realized with crystal clarity that this had been planned. They'd been waiting for me. Knew I'd have to pass through this corridor eventually. I was always the target. Not Daniel's authority or his policies or his vision for the territories. Just me, the Omega who dared to speak up. The one whose existence challenged everything they believed about hierarchy and power and who mattered. Time seemed to slow as the blade came toward me. I tried to move, to dodge, to do anything, but my body was too slow, too damaged, too exhausted from everything it had already survived. This was it. After everything, after being found, after being protected, after finally finding my voice, I was going to die in a palace corridor while Daniel sat in a council chamber defending decisions he'd made to save me. The irony would have been funny if I wasn't so terrified. But then, a roar. Not a human sound. Not even a wolf sound. Something deeper, older, absolutely primal that shook the stones beneath our feet and made every wolf in the corridor freeze. Daniel exploded into the space like a force of nature, moving faster than should have been possible, and suddenly he was between me and the blade. His hand caught Jackson's sister's wrist, stopping the knife inches from where it would have pierced my throat. "You dare," he said, and his voice was barely recognizable, more growl than words, his wolf so close to the surface that his eyes blazed pure gold. "You dare attack her under my roof, under my protection." The crowd scattered, self-preservation overriding their anger, but Daniel didn't let go of the woman holding the blade. He twisted, forcing her to her knees, the silver knife clattering to the stone floor. "She killed my brother," she screamed, defiant even kneeling before an Alpha King. "She deserves to die." "Your brother," Daniel said, each word precisely enunciated through barely controlled rage, "was executed for rape and assault. He deserved exactly what he got. And you—" He released her wrist only to grip her throat instead, lifting her slightly. "You just committed treason by attempting to murder someone under direct royal protection." Guards flooded the corridor now, weapons drawn, surrounding what remained of the Crescent Moon wolves. I stood frozen, my hand pressed against my throat where the blade would have struck, unable to process what had just happened. How close I'd come. How he'd known. Daniel released Jackson's sister, letting her fall back to the stones. "Arrest them all," he ordered. "Every single one. Attempted assassination. Conspiracy. Take them to the cells." As the guards moved to comply, he turned to me, and the fury in his expression shifted to something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Are you hurt?" His hands hovered near me, not quite touching, like he was afraid I'd shatter. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Juliet, how did you know?" I whispered. "You were in the council chamber. How did you—" I felt it. He did touch me then, just his fingers against my cheek, grounding. Through the bond, your fear. I felt it and I knew. The bond. The thing I'd been fighting, questioning, not sure I wanted. The thing that had just saved my life. "Come," he said gently, wrapping an arm around me to steady me as my legs finally gave up, pretending they could hold my weight. "Let's get you somewhere safe." "Is anywhere safe?" The question came out broken, defeated. "They tried to kill me in your palace, Daniel, in broad daylight, with guards everywhere. If they're that determined, then I'll be more determined." He guided me down the corridor, away from the arrested wolves and the silver blade still gleaming on the stone. "You were right, you know. In the council chamber. Everything you said was right. I made everything worse." "No." He stopped, turned me to face him. "You made everything real. Made it impossible for them to pretend this isn't happening. that omegas aren't suffering, that the system isn't broken. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, infinitely gentle. And if that means I have to challenge the entire pack structure to keep you safe? If it means standing against councils and alphas and anyone else who thinks your life doesn't matter? His eyes met mine, burning with certainty. Then that's exactly what I'll do. This is going to start a war. Then it starts a war. He smiled, fierce and unafraid. I didn't become Alpha King by avoiding fights that needed to be fought. And standing there, in a corridor where I'd nearly died, held by an alpha who'd just promised to burn the world down, rather than let me be hurt again. I finally understood what the bond had been trying to tell me all along. This wasn't about being claimed or controlled or possessed. It was about being chosen, and choosing him back. They came at dawn, not with diplomacy or council debates or political maneuvering. They came with teeth and claws and the kind of violence that had been building since the moment Daniel had executed 3 wolves and told the territories that Omega lives mattered. I woke to howling, not the ceremonial kind, not the mournful songs wolves sang to the moon. These were war cries, savage, hungry, promising blood and retribution. They echoed through the palace, bouncing off stone walls until it sounded like the building itself was screaming. Daniel was already gone from the chair where he'd been sitting when I'd finally fallen asleep, watching over me like he'd done every night since the attempted assassination 3 days ago. His scent lingered cedar and smoke, and that undercurrent of alpha power, but the room was empty. I forced myself up, ignoring my body's protests, and moved to the window. The courtyard below was chaos. Wolves poured through the gates, dozens of them, maybe more, all bearing the crescent moon insignia mixed with colors from other packs, the eastern territories, northern clans that had always resented Daniel's rule, southern packs that saw Omega rights as a threat to their power structure. They'd unified, against him, against what he represented, against me. Caroline burst through the door, her face pale. "We have to get you out. There's a passage that leads—" "No." She stopped mid-sentence. "Juliet, they're here for you. They've declared you a threat to pack hierarchy. If they get to you—" I said no. I moved away from the window, my decision crystallizing with sudden absolute clarity. I'm done running, done hiding, done being the reason good people have to fight my battles while I cower in safe rooms. This isn't cowardice, it's survival. I've survived enough. I met her eyes, and whatever she saw there made her step back. "Where's Daniel?" "The courtyard. She swallowed hard. "He's trying to hold them back. Him and the royal guard. But there are too many, Juliet. They planned this, coordinated it. They're not just trying to kill you anymore. They're trying to overthrow him." She nodded miserably. Of course they were, because that's what this had always been about. Not justice or Omega rights or even me specifically. It was about power. About alphas who couldn't stomach the idea of a king who valued mercy over dominance, protection over hierarchy, actual justice over the comfortable brutality they'd always known. And I'd given them the perfect excuse. I grabbed a cloak from the chair, threw it over the nightgown I was still wearing, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Caroline called after me. "To choose," I said simply. "The bond or safety. Daniel or survival. The future I wanted or the past I'd been trained to accept." I'd been standing at that crossroads since the moment I woke in his bed, since he'd asked who hurt me with a voice that promised retribution, since he'd given me choice when he could have simply taken. Time to stop hesitating. The courtyard was a nightmare rendered in blood and moonlight. Bodies littered the stones, some still moving, most not. The air reeked of copper and fear, and that particular scent of violence that made even my dormant wolf whimper. Fires burned in braziers along the walls, casting everything in orange and shadow, making it hard to tell friend from enemy. Daniel stood at the center of it all. He'd shifted partially, maintaining enough human form to speak and strategize, but with his wolf's strength and speed. His clothes were shredded, blood his own and others painted across his chest and arms. He moved like death itself, taking down anyone who got close with brutal efficiency. But there were so many of them. For every wolf he dropped, 2 more took their place. The royal guards fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered 3 to 1 at least. I watched one go down, throat torn open, and had to swallow back bile. This was because of me. All of it. These deaths, this war, this chaos, all because an Alpha King had decided one Omega's life mattered more than political convenience. "Daniel," the voice cut through the battle loud, commanding, unmistakably Alpha. I recognized it even before I saw him step into the courtyard center. Alpha Marcus. The one who'd challenged Daniel in the council chamber. The one who'd called Omega justice favoritism and compromise. He was fully shifted, a massive gray wolf with amber eyes that gleamed with triumph. He stalked forward, and the fighting around him stopped both sides, pulling back to give them space. Because this was what it had been building toward all along. Single combat, alpha against alpha, the old way of settling disputes. Winner takes everything. Daniel shifted fully in response, his wolf emerging in a ripple of power that made the air itself vibrate. He was bigger than Marcus, darker, more heavily muscled, with eyes that burned gold even in wolf form. He looked every inch the Alpha King, born to rule, impossible to defeat. But he was exhausted. I could see it in the slight hesitation before he moved, in the way his left foreleg wasn't bearing weight quite right. He'd been fighting for who knew how long before I'd even woken up, had probably been taking the brunt of the assault to protect his guards. And Marcus was fresh, rested, waiting for exactly this moment. They circled each other, and the courtyard held its breath. "This ends now," Marcus said, and his wolf's voice was distorted but understandable. "You challenged the natural order, made us weak, all for an Omega who—" He didn't get to finish. Daniel lunged, and the two alphas collided with a sound like thunder. They went down in a tangle of teeth and claws, rolling across blood-slicked stones, each trying for the killing blow. The watching wolves both sides began howling, encouraging their champion. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch as the two most powerful alphas I'd ever seen tried to tear each other apart. Daniel got his jaws around Marcus's shoulder, shaking hard enough that I heard bone crack. But Marcus twisted, claws raking across Daniel's ribs, opening new wounds that bled freely. They separated, circling again, both panting. "You're weak," Marcus growled. "Compromised by sentiment, by her." He looked directly at me then, and I realized with cold horror that he'd known I was there, had probably been counting on it, counting on my presence to distract Daniel, to make him hesitate, to give Marcus the opening he needed. And it worked. Daniel's eyes flicked to me just for a second, just long enough to check that I was safe, and Marcus struck. He hit Daniel's injured side, driving him into the ground, jaws going for his throat. "No." The words screamed through my mind, through the bond, through every fiber of my being. No. I didn't think, didn't plan, didn't consider consequences or safety, or any of the rules I'd spent my life following. I just ran, straight into the middle of the fight, between two shifted alphas who could kill me with a casual swipe, and I screamed not words, just pure defiance, pure refusal to let this happen. Both wolves froze. Marcus stared at me like I was insane. Daniel's eyes went wide with what looked like terror, not for himself, but for me, for what I'd just done. "Enough," I said, and my voice shook but carried. "This ends. Not with blood, not with death. It ends with choice." I turned to face the assembled wolves, the attackers, the defenders, everyone who'd come to this courtyard expecting violence to solve what words couldn't. "You want to know if the bond compromised him?" I gestured to Daniel, to the Alpha King bleeding on the stones behind me. "You want to know if loving an Omega makes him weak?" I felt it then, the bond, that connection I'd been fighting and questioning, and refusing to fully accept. It pulsed in my chest, warm and certain and absolutely right, and I stopped fighting it. I let it in, let it flood through me, let it connect us in a way that went beyond words or scent or physical proximity. I felt his shock, his fear for me, his desperate need to protect even now. But I also felt his strength, his certainty, his absolute conviction that this fight, this war was worth it, that I was worth it. "The bond doesn't make him weak," I said, and my voice grew stronger, powered by something I'd never accessed before. "It makes him brave enough to stand against all of you, to say that power isn't just about dominance and hierarchy and keeping others small so you can feel big." I met Marcus's wolf eyes directly, refusing to submit even though every instinct screamed at me to look away. "He's not compromised by loving me. You're compromised by being so afraid of change that you'd rather start a war than admit maybe, just maybe, you've been wrong all along." Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. And then Daniel stood behind me, his wolf's form pressed against my back, protective and supporting simultaneously. Blood dripped from his wounds, but he stood tall, unbroken. The bond between us blazed bright enough that I swear the other wolves could see it, this golden thread connecting us, making us stronger together than we'd ever been apart. "You want to kill me?" I continued. "Fine, but you'll have to go through him first. And if you somehow manage that, you'll have to go through every wolf who's tired of the old ways, every omega who's done being invisible, every beta who's sick of watching injustice and calling it tradition." I smiled, fierce and unafraid. "So, ask yourself, is maintaining your power really worth that war? Because I promise you, it's coming. Whether I die today or not, the world is changing." I stepped forward, putting myself between Daniel and Marcus again. "The only question is whether you're brave enough to change with it." Marcus shifted back to human form, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just stared at us, and I genuinely couldn't tell if he was about to attack or retreat. Then he laughed. Short, bitter, defeated. "You're right," he said quietly. "Moon goddess, help us all. You're right." He looked past me to Daniel. "I yield. The challenge is withdrawn." And just like that, it was over. The tension broke like a snapped cord. The attacking wolves began backing toward the gates, their momentum shattered by whatever they'd just witnessed. The royal guards didn't pursue too exhausted, too grateful it had ended without more death. Daniel shifted back to human form beside me, immediately wrapping his arms around me despite his injuries. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen," he murmured against my hair. "And also the most magnificent." I was shaking, adrenaline and fear and relief all crashing through me at once. "I chose," I whispered. "The bond. You. All of it. I chose." His arms tightened. Thank the goddess. Behind us, the sun was rising, painting the blood-soaked courtyard in shades of gold. A new day, a new beginning, built on choice, not force. On courage, not compliance. On love that was strong enough to challenge everything. The healers came at noon. By then, I'd watched Daniel refuse treatment 3 times, insisting his guards be tended first. Watched him walk the courtyard, cataloging the dead with a grief so profound it made my chest ache. Watched him speak to each surviving guard personally, thanking them, honoring their sacrifice. Watched him be the king he'd always been, the one who'd made me believe alphas could be more than what I'd known. Caroline finally got me back inside when I started swaying on my feet, my adrenaline crash catching up with me in waves of exhaustion that made my legs feel like water. She'd tried to get me to my rooms, but I'd refused. I wasn't leaving Daniel. Not now. Not after choosing him in front of everyone who'd ever doubted us. So we compromised. She settled me in the great hall where the wounded were being brought, where I could see him moving among his people, and where he could glance up periodically to check that I was still there. Still safe. Still choosing him. The cost of the battle became clearer as morning turned to afternoon. 11 royal guards dead. Another 23 injured, seriously enough they'd need weeks to recover. On the attacking side, the numbers were worse: 37 dead, dozens more wounded. All because people couldn't accept that maybe Omegas deserved basic dignity. All because I'd refused to stay invisible. The weight of that settled on me like stones. Each body carried past, each grieving mate or parent or child. This was the price of change. This was what revolution cost. "Stop," Daniel's voice, close and gentle. I looked up to find him crouching in front of me, his own wounds finally bandaged, though blood was already seeping through the wrappings on his ribs. "Stop taking this on yourself," he said, like he could read my thoughts. Maybe he could, through the bond. Maybe that's what mates did, carried each other's burdens whether you asked them to or not. People died because of me. People died because other people chose violence over progress. He took my hand, his touch warm despite everything. "You didn't start this war, Juliet. You just refused to be its silent victim. That's the same thing." "It's really not." He settled beside me on the bench, close enough that our shoulders touched. "If we only fought battles that didn't cost anything, we'd never fight at all. We'd just accept injustice because challenging it is hard." He gestured at the hall around us, at the wounded being tended, at the survivors helping each other, at Mira directing resources with quiet efficiency. "Look at them. Really look. Half these wolves are from packs that would have turned you away at the gates a week ago. Beta, Alpha, Omega, all bleeding together now, all understanding that maybe hierarchy matters less than we thought." I looked, and he was right. I saw an Omega healer stitching up an Alpha's wounds while the Alpha thanked her. Actually thanked her. Saw Betas carrying Omega injured with the same care they'd give their own Alphas. Saw the old distinctions starting to blur at the edges. "It's not enough," I said quietly. "Not for what it cost." "No," he agreed. "It's not, but it's a beginning. And beginnings are always bought in blood." By evening, the courtyard had been cleared. The bodies both sides had been prepared for proper ceremonies. The wounded were stable or as close as the healers could manage, and the survivors had begun to gather, drawn by some unspoken understanding that what happened next mattered as much as what had come before. Daniel stood before them, no longer covered in blood but still wearing the evidence of battle in healing wounds and exhausted posture. I stood beside him because he'd asked me to, and because running away from this felt like betraying everyone who'd fought. The crowd was massive. Not just the wolves who'd been in the courtyard that morning, but others who'd heard what happened, what I'd done, what Daniel had declared, what we'd chosen together. Today we fought a war, Daniel began, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. Not for territory or resources or power. We fought over a question that should never have needed answering. Do all lives have equal value? He paused, letting that sink in. Some of you fought because you believed the answer was no, that hierarchy matters more than justice, that keeping Omega small keeps the rest of us strong. His gaze swept the assembled wolves, including those who'd attacked and then yielded. And some of you fought because you knew that answer was poison, that any system built on the suffering of the powerless is already broken. Movement in the crowd. The attacking wolves, those who'd survived, who hadn't fled during the chaos, stepping forward as a group. Marcus at their head, his expression grim but resolved. They knelt. Not in submission exactly. In acknowledgement. In acceptance. We were wrong, Marcus said, and his voice was steady despite what the admission cost him. Not about everything. The change will be hard. Traditions will die. Some of us will struggle to adapt. He looked directly at me. But you were right. About the system. About what we've been calling natural order being nothing more than comfortable cruelty. He bowed his head. We yield. Not just the challenge, but the old ways. We're ready to help build something better. The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, other wolves began kneeling. Not the ones who'd fought, they were already kneeling or too injured to stand. But the watchers, the ones who'd been content with how things were because change is terrifying, and the old ways at least made sense. They knelt anyway. And I realized this was the real victory. Not the battle we'd won through violence and desperation, but this moment where people chose differently, chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could be better than we'd been. Daniel's hand found mine, squeezed gently. Rise, he said, addressing the kneeling wolves. All of you, because this, he gestured at the crowd, at the mixing of ranks and packs and former enemies, this is how we move forward. Not with some wolves elevated and others diminished, but as a pack, all of us, equal in value if not in role. He turned to me, and there was a question in his eyes. Permission being asked even now, even after everything. I nodded. Juliet will stand beside me as Alpha Queen, he announced, and I felt the bond flare between us, golden and absolute. Not because she's my mate, though she is. Not because I'm claiming her, though I would if she'd let me. That got a ripple of surprised laughter. But because she's proven she has the courage and wisdom to help lead, to speak truth when it's dangerous, to stand for those who can't stand for themselves. He smiled at me, warm and proud and absolutely certain. She'll be the voice this pack has been missing, the reminder that power isn't about domination but protection. And anyone who has a problem with that, his smile turned sharp, is welcome to challenge me. Though I should warn you, I'm in a really bad mood about people threatening my mate. More laughter, this time genuine. The tension breaking into something almost like hope. Go, Daniel said, dismissing the crowd. Rest, mourn, heal. Tomorrow we start rebuilding not just the courtyard, but everything. A pack where all wolves matter. Where hierarchy serves instead of strangles. Where we're judged by our actions, not our birth. The crowd dispersed slowly, wolves helping each other toward food and rest and the comfort of survival. I watched them go, these people who'd been ready to kill me this morning, and were now accepting me as their queen. The absurdity of it hit me suddenly, how in 1 week I'd gone from invisible Omega servant to the most controversial wolf in the territories to Alpha Queen of the Northern Territories. And I'd survived a war but still absolutely hated the palace stairs because my ribs were screaming and there were approximately 7,000 steps between here and the rooms where I could finally collapse. Daniel must have felt my exhaustion through the bond because he swept me up without warning, cradling me against his chest despite his own injuries. I can walk, I protested weakly. I know, but let me have this. He started toward the stairs I'd been dreading. Let me take care of you, just for today. Tomorrow you can be the fierce alpha queen who terrifies councils and stops wars. Tonight, just let me carry you." I relaxed into his arms, too tired to argue, too grateful to care about pride. "Daniel? Thank you. For finding me. For everything after. For—" my voice cracked. "For making me believe I was worth fighting for." His arms tightened, careful of my healing ribs. "You've always been worth it. I just helped you see what was already there." We reached the top of the stairs finally, and he carried me down the corridor toward rooms that were starting to feel less like a cage and more like home. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "Now?" He shouldered open the door to what had been just his room but was apparently now ours. "Now we sleep for about 3 days. Then we start the actual work. New laws, new policies, convincing Pax that treating everyone with basic dignity won't destroy civilization." He laid me gently on the bed, settled beside me with a groan that suggested his injuries were worse than he'd let on. "And somewhere in there," he continued, pulling me close, "we figure out this mate thing. The claiming mark. The bond. All of it. On your timeline. Your choice. Always." I pressed my ear to his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady, strong, alive. We'd both survived, against odds that should have crushed us. "I choose you," I whispered. "In case that wasn't clear from the whole standing between you and an enemy alpha thing." His laugh rumbled through his chest. It was moderately clear, though possibly insane. "We should work on your self-preservation instincts," says the man who fought an army while injured. "That's different. I'm the Alpha King. Stupid heroics are literally in my job description." I smiled against his skin, exhaustion finally winning. "Then I guess we're matched. The Alpha King and his insane queen." I like the sound of that. His hand traced patterns on my back, gentle and soothing, and I felt myself drifting. But just before sleep claimed me completely, I felt him press a kiss to my hair and whisper, "Thank you for choosing me back." And I realized that for the first time in my entire life, I'd chosen something for myself. Not survival, not invisibility, not safety, but love. Fierce, complicated, absolutely terrifying love that had already cost us blood and would probably cost us more before this was over. And I'd choose it again. Every single time. Because being invisible was surviving. But this was living. I woke before dawn to find him already awake, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name. "How long have you been staring?" I murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Not nearly long enough." His fingers traced idle patterns on my shoulder, careful of the bruises that were finally fading to yellow-green. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and this will have been a dream, that you'll have vanished like smoke. I'm not going anywhere." I shifted closer, tucking myself against his side despite the lingering ache in my ribs. "You're stuck with me now. Alpha Queen, remember? Pretty sure that's a lifetime appointment." "Thank the moon goddess." We lay there in comfortable silence as the room slowly lightened, gray dawn bleeding to pale gold. Through the window, I could see the courtyard below cleaned now. The bloodstains scrubbed away, though they'd probably haunt that stone for generations. Workers were already moving around, beginning repairs on damaged walls and gates. Rebuilding. Always rebuilding. "Tell me what you're thinking," Daniel said quietly. I considered lying, saying something easy and uncomplicated. But we were past that now, past careful words and protective distance. "I'm thinking about all the Omegas who didn't make it here," I admitted. "The ones still invisible, still serving, still believing they don't matter because that's what they've been told their entire lives." His arm tightened around me. "We'll change that. Already are." Yesterday, 3 Omegas from the Southern Pax petitioned for sanctuary. Said they'd heard what happened here. What you did. They want to be part of what we're building. Something warm bloomed in my chest. 3 is just a start. 3 is enough to start a revolution. He pressed a kiss to my temple. "Which you'd know, being the woman who stopped a war by refusing to be invisible." "I didn't stop it. I just redirected it. Made it about something other than violence." "You made it about choice," he corrected, "which is infinitely more dangerous to people invested in the old system. Can't control people who remember they have options." I thought about that. About the crowd kneeling yesterday, not in submission but in acknowledgement. About Marcus yielding not because he was defeated but because he'd been convinced. About all the small ways the world had already shifted in just 7 days. "It's not going to be easy," I said. "No, people will resist. Some will never accept it. Probably. We'll have more fights, more challenges, More moments where it feels like everything's falling apart. Almost certainly. He tilted my chin up, made me meet his eyes. But we'll face them together. You and me and everyone brave enough to believe things can be different. The bond hummed between us, warm and certain. I'd stopped fighting it days ago, let it settle into my bones like it belonged there. Like maybe the moon goddess had known what she was doing when she tied my soul to this alpha who'd seen me when I was invisible and refused to look away. I want to do the claiming, I said suddenly. Soon. Not today, we both need to heal. But soon. I want everyone to know I chose this. Chose you. That I'm not some Omega who got lucky with a powerful mate, but a woman who decided her own future. His eyes blazed gold. You're sure? Completely. I smiled at his barely contained excitement. Though we should probably discuss what Alpha Queen actually means. Do I get a crown? A throne? Dramatic entrance music? He laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. You get a voice in every council meeting, which is infinitely more powerful and significantly less comfortable than a throne. Perfect. I've always wanted to make old alphas uncomfortable. You're going to be magnificent at it. He sobered slightly. But it will be hard. They'll question everything. Challenge your authority. Try to undermine your decisions by calling them emotional, or naive, or… Omega? I supplied dryly. Yeah. Good. I pushed up on one elbow, ignoring my ribs' protest. Let them. Let them throw every insult and dismissal they have. Because every time they do, I'll be standing there visible, present, refusing to disappear. And every Omega watching will see that we don't have to accept their narrative anymore. Pride and something fiercer flashed across his face. Moon Goddess, I love you. The words hung in the air between us, the first time either of us had said them out loud. The bond had been saying it for days, but spoken words carried different weight. I love you too, I said, and meant it with every fractured piece of my soul that he'd helped me put back together. Even though you're impossibly stubborn, and have a martyr complex and regularly make decisions that give me heart attacks, I could say the same about you. Remember the part where you threw yourself between me and an enemy alpha? That was strategic. That was insane. Strategically insane. He pulled me down for a kiss that started gentle and quickly deepened into something that made the bond sing between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder, his eyes were pure gold. We should probably get up, he murmured against my lips. There's a council meeting in 2 hours. New policies to draft, petitions to review, an entire power structure to dismantle and rebuild. Sounds terrible. It's going to be. Good thing I like impossible tasks. I kissed him again, quick and fierce. And stubborn alphas who think they can change the world. He corrected. We can change the world. I'm just the muscle. You're the revolutionary. We rose together as the sun fully crested the horizon, painting everything gold. Daniel helped me dress, partially because my ribs still made certain movements difficult, partially because he seemed to need the contact, the reassurance that I was real and solid and his. I let him, understanding that caregiving was its own language, its own form of claiming. Before we left the room, I paused at the window one last time, looking out at the palace grounds, at wolves moving with purpose through corridors that had witnessed so much violence and were now hosting something else, something fragile but growing stronger. Hope. Juliet? Daniel's hand on my lower back, warm and grounding. I was just thinking, I said slowly, about who I was a week ago. That Omega who scrubbed floors and made herself small and believed invisibility was protection. And I barely recognize her. I turned to face him. She would have been terrified of this, of being seen, of having power, of mattering. But you're not her anymore. No, I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. I'm not. We walked to the council chamber together, his hand in mine, and I felt eyes tracking us from every corner. Curious, wary, hopeful, afraid. All the emotions that came with change, with revolution, with the death of one world and the birth of another. Let them look, I thought. Let them see exactly what an Omega could become when someone gave her the choice to be more than invisible. The council chamber doors opened before us, revealing the assembled alphas already seated. They rose as we entered, all of them, even Marcus, in acknowledgement of their king and their queen. I took my seat beside Daniel, meeting each alpha's gaze directly, letting them see I wasn't afraid, wasn't backing down, wasn't going to be the silent, decorative mate they might have expected. Let's begin, Daniel said. And as the council meeting started, As I contributed my voice to discussions about policy and justice and the future of the territories, I realized something profound. I'd spent my entire life believing I was weak because I'd been told I was. Because the system required my silence to function. Because powerful people needed me small to feel big. But I was never weak. I was simply waiting. Waiting for a world strong enough to survive what I'd become when I finally refused to disappear. Waiting for an alpha brave enough to see me not as property but as partner. Waiting for the moment when I'd choose to be visible and discover that visibility wasn't vulnerability, it was power. The meeting continued around me, wolves debating and strategizing and slowly, painfully, beautifully building something new. And I sat there, the invisible Omega who'd become an alpha queen, and I smiled, because this was just the beginning. The real work, the hard, endless, absolutely essential work of changing hearts and minds and centuries of broken tradition, was still ahead of us. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready to fight for it. Later, when the meetings finally ended and the sun was setting and we had a few stolen moments alone on the balcony overlooking the territories, Daniel pulled me close and whispered against my hair, "Thank you." For what? For being brave enough to be seen. For teaching me that real strength isn't about dominance but about protecting those who need it most. For choosing me even though I came with an entire kingdom of problems. I leaned back into his embrace, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of fire and gold. "Thank you for finding me," I said simply. For asking who hurt me like the answer mattered. For making me believe I was worth the war it took to keep me safe. His arms tightened, and through the bond I felt everything he couldn't say. The love, the gratitude, the absolute certainty that we were exactly where we were meant to be. "Still hate the palace stairs, though," I added. His laugh echoed across the balcony, warm and free, and utterly alive. "I'll carry you," he promised, every single time. And he would. I knew that with the same certainty, I knew the sun would rise tomorrow. We stood there as darkness fell, two wolves who'd found each other in the worst possible moment and decided to build something beautiful from the wreckage. An alpha king who'd learned that justice was more important than tradition, and an omega who'd discovered she was never invisible at all. She was simply waiting for a world strong enough to survive her. And now that world was here. Ready or not. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Tina Romance Library. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.